Now the second fly we're going to tie in this series of emergers, nymphs, emergers and duns is the standard Possum Emerger in the Tasmanian style. This is an excellent fly and made a big difference to our catches when we first learnt of it. It's fairly simple, so just pop your, I'm using a Tiemco 102Y, one of my favourite hooks, dry fly hook, light, almost a round bend and very strong. The first thing I do is I start at the front, as with all of my flies, and I just quietly whip the hook down to the bend. Once it's secured, I cut off the waste, and you can see I don't waste very much, and keep going to just around the bend of the hook a little bit, like so. I then put in a tail, and because I want this to sort of half sink and half float. The tail's a bit optional here, whether it's a wet tail or for a hen or a cock, but I'm going to use a hen hackle. This is the same hen hackle as I used on the standard nymph, and I'll take the same sort of quantity of a centimetre or so of fibres along the quill, like that, and in the same way hold them, pull them off the quill, and then again put them on top of the hook at the right distance hanging over, and do exactly the same procedure. Take the line up on the near side between thumb and hook, down the far side between finger and hook, and nip tight, just tighten it all up, and do that twice, and the fibres should be on top of the hook as they are, and that way they stay on top. Go over a couple more times and go around behind the tail to make sure it doesn't, where are we? We go behind the tail again. Something's going wrong here. So behind and under the tail twice, and that's it. Okay, and we just cut this surplus off here, including this one that wants to try and run away. And now we'll dub a body exactly as we dub the body of the nymph, using the dubbing loop. Again, the Loon sticky wax, and again I'll just put a tiny bit on my finger because it's worn off and it's no longer sticky, and we'll get some nice possum hair out of my little plastic box, my Kodak box, and spin this on the thread exactly as we did previously. Just note the way I'm doing it, because I know you're learning this. Just sort of put it on loosely, and then, oh, you can't see, I'm afraid, but just it'll just stick on a bit. That's what the sticky wax does, and then just roll it on. Doesn't have to be tidy, because when we pull the loop up, it'll become neater. Okay, so we've spun that on more or less. Then we get the tool again, remember, this one, the loop, and put it on the thread behind the fur, and make a loop, a couple of turns at the tail, then up to the 2/3 of the way up the hook, 3/4 of the way up, and spin it until it's fairly neat. Now don't overspin it, as I said before, until you've done at least one turn around the hook, because it sometimes breaks where it joins the hook for some reason. And then tie wind a nice neat body that tapers slightly to the front of the fly, which is the natural shape of the natural insect. So when we get nearly there, or when we get to where we want to, okay, so we'll just tie that off now. And as you can see, I'm having trouble bumping into the camera. We'll cut that off. Now we have to make a loop to represent if you remember the diagram of the hatching mayfly, we make a loop which represents the first part of the mayfly coming out of the nymphal shuck before it steps out and stands on the water. So we just want a little a little bunch of fibres as usual, and I'm having trouble here. Some people use the tail fibres of a possum for this. I tend not to, because I think they're a bit dark. They're almost black. So I just use, but I sometimes do. I know the Tasmanians mostly use the tail fibres. So same story, pull the body hairs away from the guard hairs, which will reduce the bulk of that. And then just tie this in with the points to the back, it's not terribly important, up against where the body stopped, where you stopped the body, okay? Like that. There we are. And cut off that loop, okay? Then all we do is I beg your pardon, I hit the camera. All we do now is we make a loop with that, but first we'll put a little bit of dubbing to make the thorax. So the usual dubbing story, just a little bit of dubbing spun on. Again, I put a little bit on my fingers, and we don't want too much on this one because we've got to tie a wing over the top of it rather than through it, which I'll show you on the next fly what I mean by that. So spin that with the dubbing looping tool again. Like that. Spin it on, and just make that thorax. It is so important to have a thorax on these flies. Now this one doesn't have to be quite so pronounced. Oh, one more go, I think. Yep. And then tie that off. I may appear to be fairly clumsy the way I'm doing this, but it's very difficult to do this with the camera 4 inches away from the work, the fly. Anyway, there we are, cut that off. Then all we have to do is to put the top over in a sort of a half-closed loop. A bit comes out the back, doesn't matter, but something like this, and you can't really see until you've done it. Yep, that's fine. So just tie that in like so, and cut the surplus off. Bits of hair flying around is all good. Now you would have noticed, looking at those pictures of the naturals and then the photos of the artificials, how a fish mistakes an artificial for a natural is beyond comprehension. We've had a bit of a muddle up here. Oh, it did work after all, but I only got 1/2 inch. So just do my usual finish, which I do with my fingers. 3 times round is my normal. Pull it tight with the dubbing needle as last time. Just makes it nice and neat and easy to control. Nip it up tight and cut it off, okay? This stuff's out the back. You can trim that or leave it like that. And as usual, we will put on some finishing glue to waterproof the joint. Like that. Okay. And as last time, we will use our fine little dubbing needle to remove the fly from the hook. And that is a Possum Emerger. It's a small fly, it's a 15. 13 might be more appropriate. 15's about size, well, it's a 13, it's a 15, so it's about a size 14, medium-sized mayfly. And that would float in the surface film. It'll be on its side, or its hook might be down a bit, or it might be forward. A little bit of floatant will keep it on the surface, and it just is the right. I mean, you can't expect it to float like that, although it often will, with that little bit of fur sticking out behind the loop. And when they're really difficult and you can't catch them on the other flies, this is the most difficult to fish, but it often solves the problem. So there we are. That is the Possum Emerger in the Tasmanian style with just a closed loop over the thorax.